you could study for weeks and weeks, months and months. There are tangibles, but where do you want to close the
on the agenda?
Mr. Starbird.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, this is budget study session number 5, I think, 5 or 7. Report on the Parks and Recreation Rangers program. We'd like to recap where we stand on the Rangers program. George Chapchin, Director, if you would.
Mr. Starbird, Mayor Quintero, members of the City Council. We'll do this one more time. I think with PowerPoint, we have more specifics on the potential realignment of the Rangers and maybe some other options if that's the way Council would like to go.
It's the third PowerPoint. This is your third PowerPoint, isn't it?
It's the third PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting used to this, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, this is the first PowerPoint on just the Rangers.
Just the Rangers. That's right.
And no one appreciates that more than I do, Mr. Chapman.
Maybe the next one will go to just one Ranger instead. Okay. Do you have that up there? Oh, there it is. Okay. I didn't see it on the screen. Yeah, it's not on the big screen.
Sorry.
You can go ahead and start.
Okay. We've taken a look at this program. Chief DePompa and I talked this thing over and have some specifics on this. In essence, we have a couple of options on this, on the Ranger program. One would be, of course, to leave it as it is and do nothing. Two would be, we'll just do this. Going to eliminate the Ranger peace officer role in urban parks in favor of increasing their role in interpretation and resource protection in the city's open space. In addition, these new Rangers would be trained in first aid, CPR for the professional rescuer, and basic wildland firefighting. Again, these non-peace officer Rangers would also be required to attend PC 832 classes, a 40-hour class. The new Rangers would not be authorized to carry firearms, but their role would largely be to facilitate the safe enjoyment of park facilities and activities in the city's park and open space. They would patrol the city's 5,000-plus acres of open space, as well as our 2 urban wildland parks, Brand Park and Dugmagen. And at Brand, we do have a ranger substation there as well. And in this role, it would include ensuring park security by enforcing city regulations and municipal codes regarding park use. They would have low-level citation authority, which would be parking violations, smoking, that type of thing. They could carry a baton, pepper spray, handcuffs. Again, they'd have to be better trained to do that if we're to allow them to go out there and do that. And they would have access to the police department, fire department radios, so we could radio help whenever they do need help in the open space and in our 2 urban wildland parks. Potential job duties could include develop and lead public interpretive programs on natural and cultural history, develop and lead educational programs for the schools, coordinate camping trips and off-site events, write and design interpretive flyers, newsletters, brochures, develop and implement new interpretive programs. Again, they would patrol the parks, issue warning citations, also conduct outdoor activities, interpretation, natural features of the park areas, etc. for visitors, and a number of other duties in terms of trail repair, maintenance, stream crossings and hiking trails, plant restoration, that type of thing that currently is being overseen by a different person in our department. This is what a typical ranger schedule looks like. 1 ranger from noon to 10:30, some part-time rangers to close the parks, and they're responsible for closing at least half of our parks at this point. The other half of the parks are being closed by park maintenance staff, hourly park maintenance staff. And as you can see, there's not a lot of coverage at this point of the rangers. The proposed schedule, which would be the next, if we were to convert this to interpretive and naturalist, as you can see, for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we could really load up on programming for the community by including the park ranger and the senior park ranger at the times when we have the heaviest usage of the parks. So there's some opportunities to better schedule and get some more programming, a lot more programming out of the program. Again, option 1 would eliminate the law enforcement component. The police will assume the 20% of the call service workload currently handled by the Swarm Park Rangers. And most, if not all, the calls right now do come in 911, which the police department automatically dispatches police personnel for those 911 calls. They would be assumed, the Chief DePompa and I spoke about this, they'd be assumed by the current police system. They have district patrols where they have 3 cars in each 5 area districts, and those would be dispatched if there is a call. But this option, again, wouldn't provide for any additional resources. It would cover the 20% that the current rangers are covering, but not any additional responsibility or resources from the police officers for urban parks. Another option for council's consideration, if you choose not to change the program, is potentially moving the law enforcement part of it to the police department. Police will assume the workload, and then they can also dispatch police patrol. If 1 or 2 of the park ranger position funding and funding from hourly positions were converted to the police department, we'd get better coverage in terms of public safety from the police department. Again, that assumes 1 or 2 of the rangers move over there. We'd like to keep 1 position, at least for interpretive, because we think that's a real need out in that area. So that's an option. If you can go to the next slide, they would be assigned to the community policing unit. Their responsibilities would be urban parks, and we would be proactive in presence and prevention of patrols of the urban parks. Next. Okay. We would have to find, if the council chose to move these positions over, we'd have to find additional budget cuts in our budget reductions, and that could mean a senior gardener, could mean community service specialist, or we reduce our M&O by $68,000 to $146,000, depending on how that goes, whether we move 1 ranger position or 2 positions over. And I can take any questions or comments at this point. And Chief DePompa is here also to answer any questions about the public safety component of this.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Chapshin, so which option are you leaning to?
Well, my preference would be the first option, but I know that there's a concern about the level of public safety. Chief DePompa has assured me that they could cover that 20% of the calls that our rangers take. But has said that, there's still a component. The ranger is still out in the parks. There's at least 1 ranger still out in the park, and that's still an additional body or body that they do see in uniform.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chapchin. I kind of got behind in your presentation and was just thinking.
It's drilling downstairs.
Please give me the summary of the option 1 versus option 2 again.
So, right there. The option 1 would eliminate the law enforcement component of the park ranger program, although they would still have a lower level citation authority. They'd still be able to warn people and cover the Duke-Major Park, Brand Park, and the open space. The police would assume the 20% of the call log that we had when I first presented this last week, where 80% of the calls were going to the police department and 20% were covered by the rangers. So the police will assume the 20%, and they do have police units out in force in all of our districts. In fact, they have 3 police cars per district at any one time. And there are times when they will get to a call. If we have a ranger at Maple Park and we have a call at Palmer, police will get there before the rangers just because they have the police units there. So that can be handled. And again, they'll continue to provide service whenever there's a 911 call, and usually it is a 911 call for service at the parks. They will dispatch units out to that park. And option 2 would be the elimination of the law enforcement component from the park ranger program and transfer of either 1 or 2 positions over to the police department, and that way can be converted to a police unit or a police officer, which would provide more enforcement in the parks at this point.
That's the same as option 1, though, right?
Well, not really. They still would assume the 20%, but it would provide them with 1 or 2 bodies additional to what they currently do. If the city council wants more bodies, more law enforcement bodies in the parks, this would provide an enhancement of the law enforcement. You'd lose a ranger or two
In option
in option 2.
2,
I have a question, and then Mr. McFall. Option 1 leaves us with how many rangers?
It would leave us with-
permanent, part-time, reserves?
2
whatever.
permanent and part-timers. And in the part-time money, we have $24,000, 24 and some change in part-time ranger money. So it would leave 2 park ranger positions, which would be naturalists, and 24,500 or so in part-time.
And option 2, how many park rangers?
It just depends on whether or not the council wants to transfer 1 position or 2. If 1 position is transferred over, we can still keep 2 and find additional cuts somewhere else. That would make it a little easier. We could take some out of M&O and still keep 2 naturalists.
Okay, Mr. McFall.
If the city council were interested in continuing with the ranger program, one in which the rangers continued to carry a weapon with them, one of the reasons why we would feel that option 2 then might be an item to consider. As you can imagine, carrying a weapon carries with it obviously a level of liability. The police department is simply set up to handle the kind of liability of having employees who carry weapons with them. Their supervision, the constant reaffirmation of when you can use a weapon, all of those kinds of things are part and parcel of what a police department does. If, in fact, a ranger had to use that in the Parks and Recreation Department, while they are all fully trained and prepared, state licensed and all that to do that, they do fall under a different level of supervision from literally George Chapchin, who is not certified to carry a weapon and does not provide that, thank goodness.
Not that I'm dangerous with a
Not that
weapon.
he's dangerous without it. I can't imagine. There is a certain level of a lessening of the liability, just the knowledge that in fact those employees who are carrying weapons are in fact being supervised at every level in the organization by those who in fact that's what they do. They do that professionally. They know what the current state of the law is, and the organization is put into place that ensures that weapon handling is being done in the proper, safe way. The City of Glendale has an excellent track record in that regard, and not that the Rangers have ever done anything to disregard that, but there is another level of just security and just future liability concerns, knowing that that's being supervised in the manner it should be.
And if I just may also add, we have a hard time either keeping rangers or recruiting rangers. You know, most of the folks that go to the police academy eventually want to go on to a police department. And that usually ends up happening. They'll come on board, they'll train, they'll spend some time with us, and eventually find a job somewhere else that pays better. We just don't pay enough at the level to keep these folks. So either recruitment and retention is an issue for us. And if we have a ranger, as you saw the schedule, if we have a ranger that's sick, it's really hard to backfill. Whereas if it's in the police department, you know, they've got plenty of personnel that can backfill if somebody is out sick for an extended period of time. We just don't have those type of resources in terms of enforcement. So it just makes it, I think, a lot easier to do the
I
enforcement.
have a question, and then Mr. Draymond. In terms of the urban patrols, that's easy to understand. You've got districts, and the PD spends more time in the parks. How about the rural mountainside patrols? What are your plans under the 2 options to physically have rangers up there?
As Mayor Quintero, members of the council, it would be the 2 naturalist positions. They would still be uniformed. They'd have the citation authority. They'd have a certain level of enforcement authority. But when it comes down to actually arresting someone, I think they should be calling help with the police department.
But you do envision them continuing to patrol the
Absolutely.
different mountain ranges?
Absolutely.
And how often are they doing it now?
Well, they're not doing it. I think, based on what one of the rangers told me, they are doing it maybe about 20% of their time. They spend a lot of time in the urban parks down here.
Okay, Mr. Draymond.
I was just curious, just informationally, how long have our Rangers been armed?
I think probably 16 out of the 19 years they started out unarmed, and then they were authorized guns, I think, by the city manager back then.
About a decade and a half, we've been at this level of increased liability that we're talking about now, decade and a half later. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Is that about right? Okay, thank you. And then, Mr. Chapchin, with that $24,000 or so that we're talking about, how many, what are we calling them, volunteers or part-time or supplemental would that get us?
Well,
individual
last year it
bodies.
got us 3 people at about 1,000 hours. It's really a part-time Ranger FTE, which is a half-time FTE, so it got about 1,000 hours of part-time Ranger time, spread out between 3 or 4 people.
Okay. So we still think approximately 3.
I'm sorry?
But you're comfortable with that, about 3 people?
Well, yeah, it's a
Three
half
individuals.
FTE.
Okay.
It's 24/3.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm glad you weren't armed, you yourself, last week. You might have used your weapon on me. So,
Not at all.
so.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, what is the decision then? Do we want to go with option 1 or option 2?
Ask a question?
Sure.
Mr. Quintero? And maybe this is just a protocol kind of thing. We have not heard from any of the Rangers themselves in this process. And is that because and it's not a loaded question, it's just a protocol question. We have heard from Rangers here in the past, but we haven't with this go-around of budget discussions. There's a lot that's been asserted here, but I'm not hearing from them, and maybe that isn't the appropriate thing. I don't know, and so that's why I'm asking.
Mayor, we have heard from the Rangers. They've been in communication with us by email.
No, actually, I've heard nothing on the record, Mr. Weaver.
Not on the record, but
That's
by
what
email.
I'm asking.
Yeah, they spoke at your last study session as an association.
Right.
So, I mean, we wouldn't call on the Rangers to speak as employees, but they have the right to speak to you as individuals, and they have as the association. I think they spoke to you at the last budget study session about their views, and then they had the representative of the
State.
California Rangers Association.
So that gentleman was supposed to be here speaking on behalf of their association.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That was all.
Okay. Is it option 1 or option 2?
Option 1.
Door in front of which
Option
Merrill
one.
Carroll.
Option 1, Mr. Draymond, option 1 or option 2?
I'm going to go with option 1.
Okay. Ms. Friedman?
I'm for option 1 because I think it'll get the Rangers in the parks more than they are now. And I'm comfortable with the level of training that they'll be receiving. And if something really bad was going to happen up in the far forests, I wouldn't want one person taking it on anyway, no matter who they were or how well trained they were. So I think calling for backup when you're in a really sticky situation is a good idea. But I hope that we can get more Rangers with whatever cost savings this brings us.
Mr. Najarian?
I like option number 1.
Yeah.
But one thing, it puts us more eyes up there during fire season, too. I mean, we have our choppers up there, but having them patrol that area more often, you never know what's going to happen in the fire season. Thank you.
I also think option 1 is the way to go, but I do want to say once again, I think it's very important that working with the senior rangers, with the section head and Mr. Grossman, I believe his name is, I hope that we begin to develop a reserve officer corps. I'm just convinced that we can find the right people who are interested in this type of work and put them into a reserve program. I mean, obviously it would have to be in steps. They're not going to be able to go out and do the CPR training and all the different things that we're having them do, but let's get that process going. I think they're going to be a big help to us, and I think the 2 senior officers are going to enjoy training new cadre. And then in terms of these two officers who I've known throughout the years, I personally think they've done an excellent job, and I see them everywhere at all of the different city functions. I've ridden with them up in the mountains, and so I'm looking forward to them continuing their employment with the city. Financially, they'll continue to receive the same pay.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, hopefully this is going to work out for the best. We'll have more people out in the field, so to speak. And then the urban parks, absolutely, the police have got to pay attention. They know that. They have to pay attention to the urban parks here in the city. Okay, with
I was just curious if Mr. McFall happens to know, or if Mr. Chapchin happens to know. You mentioned Mr. Grossman. Is he still on board with the park ranger program, or is he transitioning to the police department, as we're hearing out on the streets?
He is. He's still a park ranger. He has applied for a police officer position.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
okay, next.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, our next item I thought we'd touch on for a few minutes before turning to the CIP is a quick recap of the general fund, which has really yet to be completely resolved because you have further discussion about the police department 5% and some concerns expressed there about those, but also at least one of the considerable strategies that we have for helping to close the budget gap, which is the current discussions over wage and salary concessions yet resolved. So there was some reluctance to conclude the discussion until we see how that strategy came out. But I thought we might just quickly touch on some of the numbers that we seem to have consensus on. If you look at the bottom of this Excel spreadsheet there, the $279,274 in parens over on the right-hand margin, these represent the reductions that were essentially restored as we noted them going through the various departments. Again, this does not include any of the comments about the police department reductions, but there was the planning 5% restored. There was a planning position that could be shifted to a non-general fund source, as well as an effort to offset overtime with comp time that did that result in a reduction or an increase, Bob?
Reduction.
The 94,006.
Reduction in expenditures.
Reduction in expenditures. Okay, so it's being treated properly up there as a positive. That's right, because it reduced expenses. Then restoring Chevy Chase Library, and we have to note here that this number, $61,738, is actually twice the cost that Nancy requested for restoring Chevy Chase Library, because the original spreadsheet...
That would be Cindy.
I mean Cindy. Pardon me. Pardon me, Cindy. Where are you? Okay, sorry, Cindy. Synapse misfire there. Chevy Chase Library, because the original number was mistakenly shown as a addition of resources, not a reduction.
No, negative.
It was shown as a negative. So essentially, to restore it, it has an impact of twice the amount on the bottom line. But that doesn't imply that the library would get $61,738, but it does restore the $30,000 and change that Cindy had requested. The last item we noted was not implementing the library's transfer of some cost to non-general fund sources, which was going to have an impact on programming. And so I think there was an expression of not wanting to implement that component. All of those taken together, again, before you finish discussing the police proposed 5% reduction, left a gap then of $276,274 that we would need to find a means of shoring up. Depending on what happens with the police budget, this number could be an additional $1 million to $1.1 million or $1.2 million more. But at the same time, and if you'll scroll down here, Bob, The other options that we showed for helping to close any budget gap have yet to be completely resolved. That's line number 56, the wage and salary concessions, which, depending on those concessions, could be between zero if there are no concessions and as much as $2 million if the concessions were the complete planned increases. So, as yet, that number has yet to be resolved because we are still in discussions with the GPOA and the GMA, and as a result, we really can't pull together a final strategy for addressing any budget shortfall that might result from your conclusion of your review of the police budget. Laura?
Question?
Ms. Friedman.
In the last budget session, I think it was, we heard some additional cost-saving ideas from different departments, like libraries had come in with an option of reducing the tech support at night, and city clerk had some ideas. Where is that? Where on this sheet are those? Are those on the bottom, additional reductions, or have they already been incorporated into the top part?
Those are built into a couple places. One, most of the presentations that you heard were an explanation of that portion of the 2.5%, further 2.5% reduction that was being considered.
So they're in the further 2% down here.
That's correct.
I think
yes.
most of them are, yes.
Just because I think, not to speak for my colleagues, but I think that those, we had given some input and accepted most of those cuts,
That's correct.
but I don't know whether we're being asked to kind of
Part of the 6.
go through now and cherry pick out.
No. No, actually, we anticipated the cherry picking would have been at your last study session. So unless you pulled something out, we've assumed that you were okay moving forward.
They're included in the $650,000 figure that is above the gray line, several
Right.
marks. You see the additional, department additional 2.5%. That's what the $650,000 is.
So there's nothing in there that we haven't heard the result of then.
That's correct. And it was those discussions that caused council to make the adjustments that are the last four, the planning, the 164, the 94, the 61, the 147.
And all of these were noted in the detailed list, what we were calling the Day of Reckoning list that you went through at the last meeting. So you went through the 2.5% and you went through the 5%. We highlighted all the 2.5% items that have been offered up by the various departments.
Mr. Draymond.
Well, I think the last part did answer my question. These are it's not just the ones that we seem to say we were okay with, but also the ones that we seem to say we were not okay with.
Right.
So those are reflected in the 164,
Right,
94,
exactly.
61, 140.
These are the ones we seem to get consensus on. In fact, these were the ones you really had your discussion about. Most of the adjustments, everybody seemed to be okay with them as they were presented. You have not concluded the review of the police, and there we picked up on a number of programs. There seemed to be some concern about those reductions, but you hadn't concluded anything. There were the four rather small programs, the youth programs, Equestrian PAL Star, Explorers program, and then there was the COPS reduction and the vice reduction that you wanted to have more conversation about those. Now, those were very sizable. All those together would be a little over $1 million, so those were very sizable. But recognizing that we were not really able to bring to a conclusion one of the significant strategies, which is the wage and salary discussions, there was reluctance to conclude the review of that last component.
All right, Mr. Mayor, could we come up with some really fancy reference term for Day of Reckoning?
We call it the DOR
The
list.
DOR. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments?
I might make just one last comment. We would anticipate, if we can make some progress on wage and salary concessions, to come back this next Tuesday with, again, a review of the police budget. And with that, we're anticipating utilizing a combination of the strategies under the other options, including, as a minimum, voluntary furloughs and wage and salary concessions to help close this final gap in the budget. But again, we won't know exactly what magnitude that could be that we could draw on until those discussions are concluded. We'd hope by this next Tuesday, but that might be optimistic.
Ms. Friedman.
Assuming that the state borrows $4.5 million, do we come back and do this all over again?
Well, what I noted at the last, in fact, I think the last couple of study sessions was if it stays with just the borrowing, as they can do under the state constitution, then my recommendation would be that we make them a loan out of the general fund reserve and set it up as a loan asset. So in effect, your fund balance doesn't change, but the amount of money available for you to appropriate would be less by whatever it is you loan them, but you carry it on your books as a loan or an asset earning interest. Now, if somehow they figure out a way to go beyond that and take current revenues that will be ongoing, then we might very well be back here talking about the implications on the budget.
Can I ask Mr. Hassan, Mr. Hagani something? I wanted to ask the
Yes, sir.
planning director a question.
I think the answer is yes, Hassan could sign for the loan himself.
Yes. I realize that we never asked you when you had come in with your offer of eliminating a position. I never asked you whether that's something that you would like for for the health of your department to change that position. In other words, were you relieved when we said that we weren't inclined to do that, or is this something that's more of a managerial decision that...
I guess the answer to your question is that if that position was taken away, that would I would choose a position that would not compromise the health of the department. So it was possible to eliminate a decision without compromising a position without compromising the health of the department.
The what of the department? Health?
The health of the department.
Mr. Starman.
Let me add, of course, we're trying to be rather oblique because it is one position, and as a result, we want to be careful here. But I think that position is one that you should have some further discussion about from a programmatic standpoint.
That was mine.
Because it does affect sort of the alignment within the department and the processing of land use entitlements that I think can be shouldered by the department, but it really changes the flavor of how those decisions are currently made and would move to a different kind of management system that I think the council deservedly should have a little more conversation about before you move in that direction. That's why Hassan was very oblique and rather uncomfortable putting it out here, but it is an option. I think it probably merits additional discussion before you take that step.
So procedurally, can we do that in closed session or whatever way we need to do it?
Probably can't do it in closed. We've anticipated you cannot do it in closed session.
No, if it involves a layoff.
We will just at some point need to make the individual more aware of the option and then frankly come in the front door and have a conversation with you about it here at a public meeting.
So then, with that particular item on this budget, maybe we should kind of hold that one open and not make a resolution.
We actually pulled it back off the list. It's not an item that we'd be implementing, so we pulled it back off the list again. And instead of turn to the two other options, which didn't amount to the same number, but the two other ways the planning department could contribute to trying to save money. We've since included those two options on the list.
Mr. Trayman.
Well, I was just going to add, unless I'm mistaken, I think that at least the majority or the consensus was not to go that route.
Exactly.
So I'm unless that changes or unless it comes to play in some other way economically, I personally am not in need of an extra presentation at this time anyway. So.
Well, I would say not at this time, but I put a lot of faith in a department head who wants to take his department in a certain direction, and that's something that I'm open to hearing about.
And that's why I thought it would be a separate discussion, not as it relates to budget, but as it relates to Hassan's views on programming in his department.
Well, then let me ask you a question, Mr. Hagani. Let me just make sure I'm absolutely clear. Your suggestion of the elimination of that position was to take your department in a different direction?
Yes, it would take
I'd like to know that.
Yes, it would change the direction that the department is taking to a different direction. Yes.
Well, see, what I'm not getting, Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Manager, is it's about, I guess we can attribute it to this word oblique that you keep using. Yes, I'm sure it would. The question is that your desire? And that's what I guess in other words, I knock your hat off your head, and And I ask you how you feel about that, and the answer comes back in this sort of not
Roundabout
exactly
way.
direct
Yes.
way, which is, yes, that is exactly what I wanted you to do, or I'll live with it. And that's not what I'm not getting
I
the
think,
distinction.
and here, let me convey to you how Hassan presented it to me. There's an opportunity here to kill two birds with one stone. While we have a budget issue, he could accomplish something he thinks would be beneficial in the department in terms of the way we process things, and at the same time generate some savings in the budget. My first reaction was, well, that's kind of a big decision the council should take more time on. I'm not so sure we should necessarily do it through the budgeting process, because it warrants more conversation about it. And I think it does. That's why...
With that, I have to tell you that I think I get the drift of where Mr. Hagani's oblique response and your, if you don't mind my saying, Mr. City Manager, your tap dancing with soft-soled shoes. I think I will then say that I would agree with Ms. Friedman that I would like to hear that sooner rather than later.
Okay. We can do that.
Any other mysterious comments? Anyone?
No, nothing is
I
mysterious.
thought I had to become as oblique because
Just to reemphasize, we have not taken, as a result, that reduction into consideration on this budget.
Yeah, that's what I thought last time. All right,
So this
thank
one
you.
is not taken into consideration. In fact, it's essentially pulled back out. That's why it's a negative, which adds to this total number.
Okay, is that it for this particular?
That would be it, unless you have some
Yep.
other direction for us.
Okay, I have a card from Herbert Milano.
Mayor Quintero, I was wondering, I have a PowerPoint to emphasize my presentation.
Scroll down. Good show.
Mayor Quintero, I was wondering if I may have 5 minutes, if I'm the only speaker.
Hey, Mr. Milano.
Thank you very much. I wanted to address the general fund in a couple of ways. First of all, to give you my interpretation of the revenues that comprise the general fund. We basically have 5 major categories, right? You got a property tax, you have sales tax, you have utility users tax, you have transfers, and then you have about miscellaneous. So roughly it's 40, 30, 30, 30, and 40. The property tax is limited to the 2% by law, and whatever new construction you can make. Sales tax is limited by the additional economic constraints that we have. So you basically are pulling in a lot of monies from transfers primarily in order to be able to sustain it and to make your roughly $170 million. So what I want to show you is the trends of the expenditure side and what has occurred since 2001. The dark line, the column shows the general fund, and the blue line shows the salaries and benefits. As you can see, we have a fairly significant increase with regard to the general fund, from about $100 million to, as you know, $168 million now, and the payroll has gone proportionally throughout the same period, roughly around 80% of those revenues. Can you have the next one, please? Now, here I put in the consumer price index as if you had no changes in the additional personnel, but rather simply changes in the CPI since 2001. And as you notice, the amount of payroll that has increased has been practically exponential, but it's a very steep increase vis-a-vis the consumer price index. Next. Thank you. Now here we have salaries and benefits versus the consumer price index. So the yellow column shows the consumer price index for the past 9 years, and the salaries and benefits as we have them reported on the summaries and on the and the data that I obtained from the detailed budgets for the last couple of years. Next one. Okay, here we have now in the blue column the proportion of those expenditures that are now comprise the police department, and you notice that there is a significantly larger and larger proportion of the general fund. Next. And here we have in red the fire department as well, which has grown as well at a very steep rate along with the police department. Next. And now we have the combination of the two. So if you go back to 2001, if you look at the combined total expenditures for fire and police compared to the salaries and benefits of the general fund, and it's not a true one-to-one comparison because this is the total amount of the salaries and benefits of the police and fire, including the enterprise funds. But you can see from the first column, 2001, they comprised roughly about 50% of that amount. In reality, it was a lot less, but basically has gone to comprise a much larger portion of the general fund. It has been increasing steadily ever since, disproportionate to the amount of the overall salaries of all of the departments combined. In other words, the rest of the departments have been squeezed more and more as the years go by. Next one. Now, if I were to hold steady the CPI with regard to the increases for payroll, the combined increases of fire and police would have far exceeded anything that we would have to budget it with regard to the salaries if we had had no increase in regard to the number of employees or the additional changes that occur with regard to the pensions. That's all right. I don't need to show that. My issue is this: is that you now have these two departments who are getting bigger and bigger, fatter and fatter, and within this area, where all the other 14 or 15 departments are concerned, they're basically getting squeezed out. And as I see you discussing amounts that are in the $2,000, $3,000 range, in my opinion, this budget discussion is taking you away from the big picture, away from the things that have impacted the budget the most, which are, the way the CPI is being applied, for example, because the CPI already includes health benefits, and the health benefits are being paid for to a great regard by the city. You have the additional pension benefits that increased significantly in 2001, and unless you are able to tackle the big issues, no amount of additional of dealing with the minutiae of the budget at $2,000, $3,000 amounts is going to get you to where you want to be if the situation gets worse. So if you are planning for the worst case scenario, you need to take a look at some major revisions with the way you have structured the way the city is budgeted all the way from 2001. Thank you.
Okay, any comments? All right, what's next, Mr. Starbird?
Next will be to take you into the capital improvement program. Bob, did we first want to touch on fees, or we'll do that at the very end? Okay, so next would be to take you into the capital improvement program. Bob McFall.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Mr. Mayor and members of council, there's three documents that you should find in front of you. The first one is called the General Fund Capital Improvement Program, and it's really a summary. It's a single-page summary. We'll be referring to that somewhat, but this takes all of the funds, all the projects, and creates a single-sheet summary of that. Secondly, there's two documents that are spreadsheets. The first is called a Summary of Projects by Fund, and this is this starts with the columns remaining balance and then goes through 5 years and then future years. And this document is one that is going to show all of the current projects under consideration from 9/10 and forward. and then a second one that is a multi-page that is actually similar, except that this spreadsheet, it's called Summary of Projects by Fund. Also, I guess we don't actually have a list of prior year appropriations. This provides you with a list of all open projects, including the ones that are also projected for 9-10 and forward. And then again, by reference, if you have your preliminary budget, not that you would need it today, but if you do have your preliminary budget, the CIP is also included in that. So starting with Bob and I are going to tag team a bit on this presentation. There's just by means of approach. Obviously, we had to make some changes in the approach to the capital improvement program this year. The capital improvement program has a large portion of it is funded by general fund resources, and there has been a need to redistribute and rebalance those in order to be able to continue to provide the ongoing M&O services while also continuing to provide for the capital program. So this budget shows a reflection of balancing that. Typically, the City Council sees the capital improvement program in a 10-year increment. Very honestly, it was hard to really get through 5 years, much less 10 years. Who knows what's going to happen at a point in the future? So we really focused largely on the next 5 years in the capital improvement program, which is necessary because projects are multi-year. But we wanted to point out from a full disclosure perspective that as you look at years 4 and 5 on the projects that we'll be reviewing, there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether the resources are going to be available in those years. And next year and the subsequent year, it'll be necessary to look at those with the same kind of scrutiny that we've looked at for the next 1, 2, and 3 years. So just from the standpoint of full disclosure, this is not a perfect five-year program. We've really focused on the next 3 years. When this was presented, when the capital improvement program was presented to council last year, the 9-10 forecast anticipated that the bond proceeds, the GRA bond proceeds, would be in the amount of $30 million, and that they would be spread over a 3-year period of time. Although they were not recognized, they weren't utilized in the first year. This plan recognizes $28 million, provides $28 million of proceeds, and they are recognized actually beginning in the 9-10. They become a part of the fund balance. And you'll see that as we go through the project, which projects are being assigned to the bond proceeds. The last point in this, in starting, is that we reviewed this with council previously, but we have found that there was an accumulated gas tax amount in the amount of $17 million. And what that is, that allowed us to continue our street maintenance and construction projects really pretty much uninterrupted, so we could continue addressing the principal part of the city's infrastructure while actually allowing us to decrease the amount of general sales tax, general fund general sales tax going to those, so that for a brief period of time we can actually transfer that amount of sales tax in the general fund operations, so we can continue, so we can have a way of continuing the general fund operations without in fact interrupting this very important part of the city's infrastructure. So those are just kind of some overall thoughts to the approach in the general fund. This is, as Jim likes to point out, this is kind of getting to the last page of the presentation that just summarizes these are in fact the notable projects that this capital improvement provides, and we'll go into more detail on these more or less to the degree that council would like to. But this is what this capital improvement program would provide. It continues the provision for Pacific Pool and the new construction of Pacific Pool, just as the City Council has been discussing. For Rockhaven, last year when this budget was adopted, Rockhaven, Montrose Library, and Fire Station 29 included funding for actual reconstruction, new construction. Under the current discussion and available funding, these have all been recharge to projects that would be renovation level projects. So at Rockhaven, there's sufficient funds in here to do a landscape renovation, some repairs on the buildings, and to continue the planning and the public planning and public input process that is underway. For Montrose Library, as opposed to the construction of a new library at the Rockhaven site, it provides for a level of renovation for the existing library, and for Fire Station 29, again, an amount had been included for the construction of a new station. This provides for a level of renovation, and I say a level because, of course, there's lots of different levels of renovation that could happen on all of these. The department heads have made what they feel is a reasonable proposal to extend the life expectancy of these buildings, and again, they can go over those in some detail. It provides for new park construction, parks that Council has already been discussing as aware of, plus renovations of existing facilities. What we have done is we have gotten away from a line item that we've carried in the budget that just is a set aside for park renovation. Now what we've asked the departments to do, whether it be parks or libraries, be very specific with a project, so it's just not setting money aside, because frankly we don't have the luxury of just setting money aside. So we're making it very project specific, so the council can establish priorities on where you would view the project money should be spent.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, before we move too far past it, we should note on the fire stations, because we've noted 26 and 29. Fire Station 26, the Verdugo Station, the amount there is $300,000, hasn't changed from the original CIP you adopted last year, and it's not proposed to change. The significant amount of the rehab money that's been allocated is noted for Fire Station 29, the Montrose Station.
That's correct, right?
I don't want to get us back into a conflict issue. Fire Station 26 hasn't changed from what you had approved in last year's capital improvement program.
Thank you for the clarification. Various libraries, the project does, this capital improvement program does provide for various project renovations, again, pretty much all of which has already been discussed with council. So the Brand Library renovation, Central Library, which we'll spend some time talking about the scope of that project, and then various renovations to branch libraries, some which have already been approved, projects are underway, and then other ones anticipated. As I'd indicated, it continues the street rehab program, although by and large using gas tax money instead. It continues to set aside funds for Shoal Canyon landfill, the post-closure costs, and the technology and wireless set-asides, although on the technology and wireless this is in a reduced level. It has been necessary to take some projects and simply push them out to outer years, not just out of the 5 years, but even out of the 10-year as originally projected, because there simply isn't the available resources that there has been in the past. So that provides an overview of the projects that are included, and we will come back and actually visit these projects. But we thought it'd be helpful if we went over did a funding overview about where the changes the funding has taken place, and just the financial strategy. And Mr. Elliott will cover that part.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, moving on with the CIP, generally our discussion when we're talking CIP is our Fund 401. However, there are other funds involved with CIP. Notably, what we talk about a lot of times is gas tax. That's Fund 402. It also includes all the capital improvements for the various enterprise funds, electric, water, and it has all the redevelopment funds as well. Just to note some of the funding sources that Mr. McFall went over, our sales tax that we're depositing into as a funding source, a recurring funding source, is down to 4%, and we've forecasted that through years 11, 12, and we have programmed in it returning to 14%. We have noted that may be questionable depending on the economy and how things return. Some of the other recurring funding sources are the host fee and the tipping fee from Shoal Canyon that go in there, and any other park or library mitigation fees. And all those are detailed out on the one sheet that we have distributed to you. This is our first stab in trying to show the differences between recurring and non-recurring, because we view those top items as recurring. Those will be ongoing throughout. Non-recurring sources, like a bond issue, they occur once every now and again, so we don't want to show those as being recurring. Same thing with grants or other transfers from the general fund. The appropriations, obviously, or the expenditures, are the different appropriations that you have in the plan as your projects. We have also the lease payment for the MSB, all the retrofitting that was done on that. And then we do have still a very small amount on to be programmed, which is about $250,000 a year. Gives us a little wiggle room on some of the projects. As Mr. McFall touched on, we still have transfers to our technology fund for wireless and financial. That's about $1.9 million. And we had programmed in transfers from the general fund. We had suspended that, and we have it again starting in 13-14, if I recall. Oh, on the expense. You're right. I'm sorry. What we wanted to do is show the kind of the before and after. This is the 2009-10 that was programmed into the CIP previously. As Bob had discussed, the $10 million was programmed in for 3 years for the bond proceeds. The difference being now another $18 million coming in 9-10, so there's a total of $28 million for the bond issue. That's the assumption. Sales tax revenue has been decreased from the 4.8 to the 1.1. Shell Canyon tipping fees, because of the reduction in deposits to the landfill, is reduced. And then the general fund transfer has been eliminated. Some of the other expenditure changes, just to note, is the projects, the amounts that we have isolated have reduced about $4.5 million throughout all the different projects. We have reduced the transfer that go into the wireless technology fund by about $500,000 a year. And then the project contingency, which I talked about earlier, was $250,000.
Mr. Mayor, Bob, I'm sorry to be consistent. Can you go back to the last slide?
Sure.
Because here we're showing what the number was in 910 for 910 as you saw it last, and what is being proposed, which means for the GRA bond proceeds, the $18 million should be 28, right?
No, that's the difference. We're trying to highlight
That's not what we're showing in the rest of the numbers.
Correct.
The sales tax, instead of 4.8, we're showing 1.1. Shoal Canyon fees, 812 goes to 682. I'm just saying to be consistent.
No, you're right.
The GRA bond proceeds should be 28 million.
You're right.
The difference is 18, but the nominal number is 28.
Correct.
Okay.
So along that, if I can just interrupt, when you say sales tax revenue, is it dropping from 4.8 to 1.1?
Right, that's the reduction from 14%.
That money was previously going for street maintenance and rehab. We're going to be drawing on the accumulated gas tax money to maintain the program level.
Is the revenue dropping that? Am I understanding that correct? Mm-hmm. From 4.8 to 1.1?
Well, this is where remember the general fund is pulled back this sales tax revenue. So instead of going into the CIP, the $3.7 million is going into the general fund.
The difference is going to general.
The difference is going to general fund, and we backfill on the street projects to make up the difference.
Okay.
Essentially, the general fund's contribution, a large portion of the general fund's contribution, was going into street projects.
Okay.
Okay, where were we? Yeah. Then this, what we want to do is just show a basic overview of what our financial position is going to be. Again, the recurring revenues of almost $8 million. The as Mr. Starbird noted, the $28 million in bond proceeds, and that basically gives us the starting balance for where we're programming the CIP. From that $35 million, we have then programmed roughly $13 million in projects, and then some of the transfers. We've also, as you see, the MSB lease payment that's programmed in there, and then the project contingency. So for 910, we're showing about $20 million in expenditures out of the $35 million. some of the highlights, and we can get into great detail on these if you like, but some of the notable projects, as Bob mentioned earlier, we have adult recreation, which is $11.3 million, and it's got a variety of funding sources. The Pacific Park Pool is $6 million, and the Columbus Soccer Field is $3.6 million. A portion of the Columbus will be part of the GRA bond issue. Some of the other park...
Columbus Field again, can I see that number?
Sure.
3.2.
Any questions at this point?
We should point out here, we continue to carry it. We do have some concerns about the lighting component of this project. When we do our CEQA review, that'll probably be the one item that'll have the biggest environmental impact. It's a fairly significant piece of this project, and will probably be the most controversial component of the project. Will be the lighting.
And if I made lighting and noise, the noise factor
lighting
as
and
well.
noise.
Some of the other items in the parks category that we have set up and programmed for the Stengel Field bleachers, Maple Park, and some of the amenities there, the Brand Park restroom renovation. All these specific ones are listed in your project listing, and we can answer any questions that you may have. Some of the library projects that we have programmed in is the Brand Park Library of $8 million. And the Central Library renovation of $10.6 million. That one is eligible for GRA bond proceeds, so that is programmed in for this year. Some of the other various branches, Cindy has asked for renovation money for Chevy Chase, Casa Verdugo, Montrose, and the Southeast storefront. General Fund, Public Works, these are just various street projects. The interchange are programmed in there. The old police building remodel has programmed in $2.5 million, and a variety of other street projects, which are Flower Street, the Brand Boulevard extension, and the basic resurfacing and reconstruction of various streets.
What is the Brand Boulevard extension?
My question exactly.
I will defer to Mr. Zern on that one.
That would be the extension of Brand Boulevard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is to finish Brand Boulevard. We completed it up to the freeway and then ran into some problems with Caltrans. We're just going to go ahead and skip over the freeway and complete it to Glen Oaks.
It's actually North Brand
to Glen Oaks.
Construction.
So the same sidewalk amenities,
Nowhere to go.
street lights, pedestrian lights, just consistent with what we did from Colorado up to the freeway bridge.
But not resurfacing, right?
There is going to be portions of that, but I don't believe any of that needs reconstruction. The pavement's in relatively good shape in the northern part of the city. And we experienced that when we split the project previously. The second phase we did up north, most of that was a slight grinding and an overlay, and that's what I anticipate here, if not even a slurry seal, because the pavement is in pretty good shape up in the northern part.
And medians? You doing anything with the medians?
Not only what's there. So we have medians in, there's a monument in the flagpole median that's there at about Glen Oaks, but there's nothing planned to put new medians in.
I mean, there's concrete medians, right? Oh, no, there's not, actually.
It's not.
Yeah, there is up at the top.
There is at the top. There's a space, the area with the freeway where we have the on and off ramp situation. There is no medians. It stops from where the medians are in the lower portion of it. But there is the one up at Glen Oaks. It has the entry monument, the flagpole, some of that. But we had no plans to put any additional medians. All of that would require Caltrans approval, widening, redoing the bridge, which Caltrans told us we'd have to do, which would far exceed what it costs to do the entire Brand project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zern.
Some of the other projects included in there are the fire stations that Mr. McFall spoke about. most of the money is on the Fire Station 29, which is Montrose.
Yeah, if I can, we should note Fire Station 26 is not a major project. It's $300,000, which I think Chief Scoggins will tell you kind of just gets us by, but is not a major project nor a significant renovation. And again, doesn't change.
Lastly, some of the information systems cover the document storage, the radio systems, and the network upgrades for various things. We wanted to just recap. We've talked a lot about the GRA bond proceeds. Basically, the $28 million that we've highlighted are programmed in these categories. Again, that was the ARC for $7 million, the Columbus Soccer Field for $3 million, the Central Library renovations, Brand Boulevard, not extension, but...
All right, Mr. Elliott. Mr. Najarian?
Mr. Quintero, as we went further in this discussion, I realized that I do have an interest in real estate, which may be affected by some of these, which is adjacent to the capital improvements, mainly the Brand Boulevard and Casa Verdugo. And because it's not parceled out like we did last time, I am obligated to recuse myself and to step out. So,
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Elliott.
not that I'm not fascinated with the entire process.
And with that, we can... if you'd like to review or answer any questions off the particular lists that we've distributed. Again, probably the key one is the 3-page the summary of projects by fund, because those are the ones that are currently programmed in for 910 and are broken down by the various categories.
Well, and what we might do so we can have the entire City Council sitting in review of the bulk of the CIP is to take action, again, as you have in the past on the Verdugo Fire Station, which again has not changed. It's the same $300,000 that's been in the CIP before.
Brand.
Chair, Ms. Friedman.
Are there any projects on here that rely on matching funds that we might not get now?
We do have funds that are grant funded or partially grant funded. Let's see, George had some in the parks categories that had suspended grants, but as yet they have not been pulled back completely.
Should any of that potential change how we evaluate this budget?
We would have to go back and look at how to reprogram some funding for, if that were to happen, if a grant was pulled or completely eliminated, we'd have to go back and look at how that would be reprogrammed or funded from another source. I don't know if Dave wants to speak to that, if we have grants suspended on various projects.
Mayor Quintero, members of the council, a couple of grants were suspended. They're supposed to be released. Riverwalk is one. Dugnasian Barn is a second. Some grant money from the county on Maple Park was also in the state funding that was frozen. That's all supposed to be released.
And it's correct that we wouldn't be proceeding until funds were available on those projects.
That's correct.
So unlike Chrome 6, there was some Chrome 6 project you decided to proceed on. I think the demonstration phase or working phase, this last phase, but on the parks we wouldn't proceed with a project unless the funds were available. So we can budget for them, but until we know the revenues would be available, we wouldn't begin the project. And
Jim, if I may, I think word is coming down from Sacramento that they will probably be releasing those because of the state bond sales.
yeah. The assumption is they'll be releasing those grant funds because they were able to sell bonds, in fact, got a relatively favorable rate and issued more than they had anticipated. So the two items that are causing Mr. Najarian to step out are the Fire Station 26. That's $300,000 in CIP, the same number we've carried in there before, and the North Brand, I'll call it the North Brand Street improvements north of the 134. So he can come back in if we take action on those two items first.
How much is the North Brand improvement again?
Steve?
Approximately.
And while he's coming up, I should point out the action that you take on this needs to be final action. It can't be subject to reconsideration a week from now or 2 weeks from now. Essentially, it needs to foreclose it.
We need a motion.
Okay, you could find.
11-12. That was a bond fund too, right? Thought it was
Extension, yeah, $3 million.
3 million.
11-12.
Well, is this something, I mean, I'm going to have to focus a little bit closer the next time I drive by there, but I mean, is this something that you feel is that important? It looks pretty nice from the car.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, like I said, the pavement condition is in relatively good shape. If it was only that, I wouldn't recommend that. But if you recall, we removed all of the brick and terrazzo, the former improvements to the sidewalk. I no longer have that terrazzo, nor can I get it. You may already see splotchy areas where we've tried to make some repairs there. So that would be the most important thing, would be to take up the sidewalk and replace that with the brick and concrete, the easier maintenance for us on that as well. Plus, carrying out, there was additional lighting that was installed along the mid portion of Brand, some additional pedestrian lighting. We would carry that up as well. Again, this is 11-12. I'd have to look at the pavement management system to see what we project the pavement condition to be then. But if that was the only thing, I'd say no, we have a few more years. But it was the idea of taking that improvement and cleaning it all the way up to Glen Oaks, which was our original intent, so we ran into the Caltrans roadblock.
Vaughn, kind of where you're going. I mean, if it's $3 million, that, I mean, I don't understand exactly what the trade-offs are, but if it's more money to put into a playground or a park, or, you know, do something that's more crucial, you know, ADA repair somewhere else, something like that.
Well, this money, as far as I know, has to be spent in the downtown area. So I know that limits that. Oh yeah, this is bond money. Yeah.
Okay,
so that's why we did that. It was limited to a very specific area.
It's GRA bonds, but you do have the latitude, because we've noted here parks that are being proposed to be funded with GRA bonds. The Pacific Pool, the ARC, Columbus, I think, is eligible for it, and we've got all those projects listed, about 6 of them there. We are having to search a bit for projects that are already in the CIP that can be funded with the bond funds. So if we didn't use this money for North Brand, likelihood is we would downsize the bond issue this first go-around and preserve those funds for probably a second issue we do just before the end of the project. Because, frankly, we're just having a hard time finding the projects necessary to put that'll qualify for use of tax increment in the downtown area. So we'd probably pull this out of the bond issue.
Mr. Weaver.
Steve, again, what are the street limits on Brand from where to where?
This would be from north of the freeway bridge, so where it picks back up to Glendale, responsibility total right-of-way, to Glen Oaks.
Across Glen Oaks or just
No,
to?
just to Glen Oaks.
Does that include the sidewalk?
It would include the sidewalks.
Where it's pretty fractured up?
Right. All the terrazzo and brick would be removed, and we'd replace it with the same kind of brick ribbon. And
Because that's one area
CC.
I do walk when I go to the Hilton. It looks pretty bad.
Correct. Right there.
Where do you walk to?
I don't pay to park at the Hilton. I park on the streets and I walk to the Hilton.
Okay.
I have to cross Brand every time. It is in bad shape on the south side.
Just a quick question. Are there safety concerns that this would address? And are there unsafe conditions there for pedestrians or?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Friedman, no, I wouldn't say that, but we would obviously upgrade all of the ADA curb ramps to the latest standards. Now, the law says as long as you have them in place, they were built at the time to the current standards, they don't have to be upgraded until the next time you actually do a full construction or repair of the area. So those would all be upgraded as part of this. Are they unsafe now? No, I would not say that. We have ramps there. We have ample width on the sidewalks to accommodate pedestrians. It's just the material itself and our ability to keep it repaired.
Mr. Weaver.
Steve, what other uses could you use it for? Since that's to be on Brand, what else is there?
Well, what we'd likely do is we'd carve it out of the bond issue. We'd issue $25 million in bonds instead of 28, and then when Phil comes back in several years from now for the last bond issue, we'd likely have projects then, and you'd have capacity then. In the meantime, your debt service would be smaller. You'd have more annual funds to utilize for whatever projects you want to do. If we don't do this, we'd probably just downsize the bond issue.
So which way would you go? I mean, if there's no other use, if council does not want,
If you don't think this is a high enough priority, then we'd hold off and we'd downsize the bonds to $25 million instead of 28, and just wouldn't do this project.
And you said we'd have a more of a, another way to put it would be more of a cash flow in the
$3 million, probably your debt service will be $250,000 to $300,000 a year on that, so that'll be freed up in their annual resources, and then in 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, when Phil comes back for what would likely be the final bond issue for the central project area, you'd have a little more capacity then, and by then maybe have identified projects you want to do.
And there's nothing in the CIP that can be used, that GRA funds can be used for, that we've identified.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we've identified just about everything that we can, and that's why Mr. Starbird is saying there is nothing else in the CIP that would qualify or be eligible for use of these funds.
That's what I'm asking, whether we can augment the money that we use for Pacific Park Pool or for
We've
some
done all
other-
of that, but if you asked Cindy if she'd like to go further in her updating, remodeling of the Central Library, she'd tell you yes.
Mr. Starbird, I think we've even maxed out the Central Library. We've really tried to maximize the use of those funds on everything in the CIP. So, again, we would downsize the bond issue by $3 million. We'd have that cash flow for use, just like anything else in the redevelopment area, and would not be eligible for other CIP, general fund CIP projects.
including the library.
So the cash flow at $250 a year, let's say, we could in fact use that in the next 2 or 3 years.
Right.
You could in-
500,000, 750, whatever.
Right.
Well,
For the library, et cetera.
I'm more inclined to go in that direction. Mr. Draymond?
I didn't have a question, didn't have my hand up, but if you're asking me my
Thought you
opinion,
had.
but no, I agree with you.
Mr. Elliott?
Mr. Mayor, one thing to note, and this is maybe a little change from what was done in the past. Our intentions are to update this every year during the budget process, and not whenever it was done in the past. And review this, and then obviously every project that comes forward will be brought to council for appropriation. Again, though, this is just a 5-year plan that we're bringing to you for review.
Mr. Starbird?
If at this point you're comfortable, if you take action on the Fire Station 26 item at $300,000, and if it's your desire to carve out the North Brand and not provide it for funding in the CIP, if you take action on those two, then Mr. Najarian can come back into your conversation.
Okay, so I think we have Mr. Weaver.
Station 26.
Casa
Steve,
Verdugo as well.
I haven't walked all of
Casa Verdugo.
Station 26. Yes. Casa Verdugo. Station 26.
Station 26.
Yeah.
I haven't walked all of North Brand, but crossing, I mean, that looks in bad enough condition that could maybe result in a triple fall or something on it. If that is the worst area, the crosswalk, is it possible to take that terrazzo out and blacktop it or something?
Well, absolutely, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember.
Curious. I don't know if there's a worse spot up there.
We'll continue to make the repairs necessary to keep it safe. It's just aesthetically that might not be a match because we don't have the material.
Or that, who cares if it matches in these times?
But we'll keep it safe, absolutely. We'll do that to the point where then it becomes where we would normally do a sidewalk replacement, and whether that's 3 years or 5 years from now, we'll come back and put that in our regular program. But we'll keep it safe, absolutely. It's just the aesthetics that would probably suffer the most, I would say.
Then I agree pulling it.
Okay, well, let's have a motion, and
I'll make that motion, 300,000 in elimination of the $3 million on North Brand extension.
a second.
I'll second that.
Any more comments? Roll call.
Councilmember Strayman?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Najarian? Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Quintero?
Yes. Mr. Najarian can return to
include Fire Station 26?
So I said
Okay.
300,000 with 26, and elimination 3 million.
Got it. He's back in.
All right,
More money for the library.
next.
We really don't have any additional presentation on
On the
CIP.
CIP?
I just have a question, Mr. Mayor, related, going back to favorite topics from the recent past, Rock Haven. In the PowerPoint, where that is mentioned, it talks about landscape, rehab, and planning. And the comment was that there was sufficient money to accomplish that. I'd like to know what that is. As far as I know, well, let me just leave it at that. Let me ask what that is.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, first thing is that we don't exactly really know what the scope of the appropriate work to be done on Rock Haven because we don't have the consultant's report, the historical report back, and it hasn't been presented to City Council. So City Council hasn't had an opportunity to really discuss the outcome of that report and then make some policy direction on where to go. So what we have done is we have assumed doing renovation in the property, part of the property immediately around the buildings. It doesn't develop the rest of the site. It doesn't re-landscape it. It really just works on the property around the immediate buildings, primarily in the front, and then provides sufficient for any repairs to the buildings, just sufficient literally to keep them from deteriorating, but not necessarily improvements. So we've called it sufficient only from the standpoint it does not do a full historic landscape restoration of the entire site, not wanting to presuppose what our direction might be until we actually have the report back from the consultants. And planning council had a chance to review it.
Based on the detailed numbers, it would provide, there's $600,000 in existing balance. It would provide an additional $500,000 over 2 years, so a little over $1 million for that.
Well, what I'm not understanding, Mr. Mayor, is for what? I keep hearing words, but I'm not quite understanding what the meaning is behind the words. I understand that we spoke with a consultant, if you will, who was going to come back with a report that was to evaluate the historic significance of the landscaping to the site. And the further direction to them was to, so that we wouldn't be duplicating work. In other words, turn the land there, buildings aside, into just an open green space, opening it to the public, and then saying, oh, by the way, folks, this isn't really what it's going to be like, so now we're taking this picnic space or whatever away from you. Since the concern was that the property was not originally a park, it was a series of gardens. So the question was to the consultant, what do we need to do to get back to that point and not do it twice? And would it be possible to do that? Since the plan was not to do much anything else with the buildings at that time, but to mothball them for future renovation, so they wouldn't continue to, as you say, to deteriorate.
Exactly.
Yes.
But the word sufficient that was used related to not sufficient land, sufficient project, sufficient investigation. It was sufficient funds to accomplish what? That I've just uttered. And the reason I'm bringing up the question is because having sat in on that meeting and hearing the direction to that firm, that was the direction. So unless something has changed in the meantime, that's the last I heard on the subject.
No, that is sufficient, and maybe we could have used a better word, and I'll take ownership on that. It was doing exactly what needs to be done around the buildings. The
perimeter?
Well, the sufficient. What the scope of the work was the vacant land that has no buildings on it, it does not provide funding for landscaping that area. It is, in fact, to do the correct landscaping around the buildings, but only in the area around the buildings. Correct from the perspective of the correct historical interpretation and restoration of those areas around the building.
I guess the confusion I'm having, Mayor Quintero, is when we say immediately around the buildings. I don't know whether you're talking about landscaping around the footprint of the buildings or the grounds.
The grounds.
Aside from the what we're calling the vacant space to the west.
Right.
It seems to me a lot of this gets back to the results of the study. You've described the study very well. That's exactly what I remember.
Right.
Do we have the study yet? Do we know what's being suggested as priorities?
Absolutely. Last week we just received the draft report on CD, so I haven't had a chance to look at it, and we'll get copies to you and City Council members.
Do we know how it fits within this?
Well, I think it is exactly as Councilman Draymond described. Is take a look at the gardens, the historic gardens, and work from there. How do we work from there to make the property accessible to people initially, and then slowly, progressively build on the rest of the property, whether it's the rehab of the buildings or demolition.
I'm just wondering, how far does this $1.1 million get us?
And that was my concern about the word sufficient. Yeah. No need to throw yourself on a dagger about the word sufficient. It was simply that in order for me to be able to judge when I cast a vote whether it is indeed sufficient, I have to know what it is we're getting for those dollars. One of the questions was, you have a building sitting out in the middle of that property that we know wasn't originally there. Right. And one of the things that we're to look at is, are we better to demolish that building now because that was a part of the original grounds, or to spend city dollars to try to restore landscaping around a building which is going to be taken out anyway, and then we end up duplicating that work later. So that was part of the question.
But I think there is enough money to do that initially.
At least that was the plan. You've done a better job of characterizing it than we were doing it. It is to take the east end of the property, the entire east end of the site, and to landscape that, re-landscape that, restore that properly. It wasn't around just the foundation planning of the buildings, but to actually do the whole front area, to in fact do the east end of the property where the buildings were. And specifically, we talked with the consultant about the one building, the newer building, also laying out, and they were pretty much in instantaneous agreement. If you're going to do something, that building needs to be considered sooner than later than what you're going to do with it, because it would affect, of course, the outcome of the design.
Well, it seems to me at this point we can put a big question mark by Rockhaven, and now that we have the draft report, see how far in that report this takes us before we put the CIP in final form to bed.
Right. Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Weaver.
No matter what happens, beside the historical report, if we give the okay on anything, we'll see the plans, right? And before it goes to contract, we'll see it. So we'll have 2 or 3 times to put our 2 cents into it.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Well, yes, but that's not my concern.
Mm-hmm.
My concern isn't whether I have chance to put my oar in about how we proceed with the restoration or a future restoration. My concern is I'm going to be asked to essentially at some point hone in on approving a set of numbers related to this, and I don't have sufficient information to know, there's that word again, sufficient, whether or not how I'm casting my vote is meaningful or potential waste of that.
And now that we have the draft report, we should be able to get there, I think.
So I'm more than happy to wait and see what we have.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding the process, but even if we put a number in, if everything doesn't fall in line, it drops out. It moves to an out year. It could do any number of things. Just because we approve it's like a budget. A budget is a work in progress. Am I missing something?
Well, but let me use an example.
Or are you planning to move it and take something else and move it up?
Let's say the initial report from the architectural firm concludes that in order to have any level of public access, you really need to spend $2 million initially. Well, then, frankly, if we're going to take that first step, we should be looking for more resources in these earlier years.
Okay, I understand that.
And we won't know until we take if we got the draft report, it would take a very short period of time to size up how far we can get in that report with the resources that are here and whether more resources are needed or not in this initial phase. So, again, my suggestion is let's take a look at that, and we'll come back by the end of this week with where that stands.
Okay.
Can I ask?
Ms. Friedman.
Trying to find it on here. What is I think it was $1.2 million for the wireless fund? What is that exactly for?
The wireless fund is a fund that sets money aside each year it's like a savings account, so that at certain increments of time we have to make a large capital expenditure to replace different components of the city's radio system, whether it be the backbone, which is about every 15 years, where it's a sizable expenditure, or the consoles in the police vehicles, or the handheld radios, which have about a 5 to 7 year life cycle. So it's just a set aside.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Any other questions on CIP?
What do you need from us today? Nothing?
Well, again, this will be before you for public hearing, when you do the public hearing, then eventually for adoption. In the meantime, the only item we have you'd like additional information on is the putting together of the consultant's report and the resources on Rockhaven. Otherwise, at this point, you're generally comfortable with the layout on the CIP and the changes that have been made. If you are, then we're okay.
Just so the record, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just so the record is clear, the council has taken final action, at least as it pertains to this budget year, on the Brand Boulevard Street Improvements Extension on Glen Oaks, from the freeway through Glen Oaks, and also Fire Station 26 and Costa Verdugo Library.
With that, can I move to adjourn?
No, we won't.
Mr. Elliott.
No, I guess.
Yeah, half a minute to load this up.
I don't know what we're doing.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, one last thing we wanted to touch on today that is a little bit of change from the way things have been done in the past is our focus on fee schedules and fees of the city. And it would help if I got the right PowerPoint. And we've got here too. One thing we wanted to roll into the budget process was adopting the appropriate fees for the city. As I understand it, there was never a consolidated fee schedule, which is one thing we've asked departments to submit to finance this year, and we are putting a master fee schedule together for the entire city. Within the fee schedule, there are obviously various sections for each department and the types of fees pertaining to various services or whatever the issue is in the city. What we've tried to do and what we're focusing on is putting together a consolidated fee schedule, and then we can post it to the website for everybody to see within the city. We've asked all the different departments through the budget process to give us any new fees that they were proposing for this year. There wasn't a tremendous response, and that was primarily due to the economy, that we did not want to increase any fees. We did, however, have planning and library submitted to us a couple of different fees, and I will allow them to speak to those in specifics. But basically, there was a change in some of the planning fees, and the library fee had a number of fees that they wanted to increase for various reasons. Some of the fees for planning, and I don't know if Hassan wants to come up and answer questions now, involve these different areas for discussion. And then I guess we can touch on these at this point. We've also, what we've handed out obviously is the PowerPoint and then the new fees that are being proposed in specifics and all the various ones. I don't know if
Thank you, Mr. Elliott, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I believe among the fees that we're proposing, the most important one that actually is not on this list is we're proposing to double the fee that we charge to legalize any construction or activity that has been done without permits and for which a citation has been issued. That is consistent with what many other cities do, and we have heard that it's easier to get forgiveness than to get permission. We're going to make it more expensive to get forgiveness, and it also takes a lot more staff resources to actually start out with something where a citation has been issued. So we're charging across the board. We're proposing to charge double the fee for any permit for an activity that has been done without permits. Then we are on the list that was on the next page. These are some of the fees. We adjusted our fees last year, and over the last year we've introduced several new practices, including staff reports for conditional use permits and all these permits. In other words, we're now adjusting. Some of them are minor adjustments. They're not major, just to reflect the real staff time and resources that we put into these projects. These are not significant. There are some adjustments. The one that is significant is use variances. We're proposing to charge the same amount as we would charge for a zoning text amendment to change the code. We think the work and the result of the policy would be the same, and we do not want to give an incentive for people to apply for a variance when they should really be applying for a zoning text amendment. This is basically the overview of planning fees.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Weaver.
I've asked the question in the past about have we got all the fees in the city tied to CPI indexing, because there's been numerous times, at least while I've been here, that we get fee structures that haven't been updated in 5-6 years. So it means the individuals or companies are being hit with a dramatic increase when we come and we hear the complaints. And I've said we ought to get to the point where we index it. I don't mean if it goes up by $5, you do it. When it goes up, say $50 or $100 by CPI indexing, it might take 2 or 3 years to get there. But tie it so these big jumps don't hit us. That's one comment.
Yes.
And the other one, I'm big on rounding. When you have a new fee, $386.20. I don't know how you peg it to the 20 cents. Why can't we round these to $50 or $100 rather than hit it on the penny?
You're violating every engineering principle.
If I may, I can address both those.
I used to round when I did budgets.
If I may, I can address both those. The first one, the CPI indexing, we actually did propose, and you did adopt the indexing last year, so that is in place already.
Bob is signifying a lot aren't yet. So.
There's still work to be done. As I said, we envision doing this every year as opposed to every 3 or 4 or 5 years. This, in my view, has to be part of the budget process. We revisit all our fees. There are good cases at times where you don't want to raise fees for various reasons. Other times there are a nexus to the cost of the city providing the fees. So there's some different reasons why you might raise a fee, and it's tied to labor or internal costs. So, but our plan really is to revisit these every year with each department and bring those to you during the budget process.
Every fee that we charge in the city. That's nice. In the 20 cents now?
And then the rounding that you talked about. We had a different rounding method for planning permits last year. We discovered that the CSI system, the computer system that we have, is set up to do a particular type of rounding, and it was not possible to change it to the other kind of rounding. So last year we proposed, and you accepted and you adopted, the rounding methodology that is now reflected, which is consistent with the computer system that we have that automatically rounds up and does not require staff to round up differently and then type it into the computer every time. This really reflects the CSI system.
So we did it.
Yes, you did.
I have a question on the library fees, or specifically the Brand Library Recital Hall. It says that non-Glendale individuals and commercial groups the fees are actually decreasing.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It came to my attention that at Brand Library, we were charging our music groups for the nonprofit rate, even though they didn't have the nonprofit status. So rather than increase their rates exorbitantly, we decided to actually reduce the nonprofit rate for Brand so as not for them to incur such an increase. But from this point on, we will ask all groups to provide their nonprofit status, proof of nonprofit status.
Reducing the for-profit rate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No. No, it did not. Did you say you're reducing the for-profit, well, Mr. Starbird said you're reducing the for-profit rate?
Wait a minute. Let me recount
Let
it.
me see if I understand. We had music groups locally who are for-profit, music teachers and the likes, who were using the recital hall at the non-profit rate.
I see.
When they discovered that, they said, well, we need to start charging you the for-profit rate because you are a for-profit company or business, but that was going to take them from $110 for 3 hours to $330 for 3 hours. So instead, they want to be consistent. They want to charge them for the commercial rate, but they've reduced the commercial rate to $210 from $330. So groups that were previously charged the nonprofit rate, instead of going from $110 to $150, would go from $110 to $210 for their 3-hour blocks, right?
Perfect.
All right.
The other thing that I'll add to that is that we also wanted to make the rates consistent with Central Library Auditorium and the recital hall. And Brand's rate was really too high.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Draymond.
Okay, Mr. Hagani. I'm
Yes.
to have an oblique conversation with you this time. Talking about doubling the fees for those who are now attempting to legalize what was illegal construction.
Correct.
What does that mean exactly in terms of numbers? Or give me an example.
Well, let's say somebody demolishes a portion of their house and does a room addition that changes the architectural
I understand
style.
the violation. I want to know about the money.
The money, well, if the trends continue like this, will not be very significant. I have not done a complete analysis on how many cases would be subject to this, but I can tell you last year when we had a high number of cases, we were doing a lot of legalization of cases. I don't have the exact numbers.
I'm not being very articulate. I'm sorry. Right now, I build something. I don't have a permit. I go ahead and build it. You catch me, and you say, "Aha." Okay. The day before, if this were to go in effect, the day before this would go in effect, what would that cost me? And the day after this would go in effect, what would it cost me?
Let me try and help if I can. As I understand it, let's say, for example, that what you should have done was come in for a variance, and you didn't come in for a variance, and we caught you. So now you have to come in for a variance to legalize what you've done. Instead of, and let's say it's a setback variance. You built a little bit into your setback area illegally. Mm-hmm. Then, as I understand it, for setback standards, new projects up to that, that's a variance for a whole unit. What would the normal fee be for somebody who came in to get a variance?
For a standards variance, for example, they would be required to, under current fees, they would be required to pay $2,200 to just get a variance.
$2,750 under the new fee.
Under the new fee.
So that would be doubled.
That would be doubled.
Have to pay $5,500 instead of $2,750.
In addition, their design review process would be doubled. So every permit that they would have to get to legalize that one action would be doubled, except for noticing fees, which we would do the same
And it wouldn't be unusual
notice.
to have design review and maybe a variance thrown in there depending on what you've done.
What I'm trying to get at, not just for me, but for the public, and also for my colleagues, is some semblance of what those numbers are. So, for example, the first indication I'm hearing that gives me an idea is this particular example you've just given.
Yes, it could be thousands of dollars. in additional fees, and that would be consistent with other cities, what other cities do, and what building and safety does here. Fire, by the way, charges triple based on the fire code, and we would not be against that idea for planning fees.
Mr. Howard, then Mr. I want to point out, in addition, the fact that somebody's coming forward and trying to legalize, given the council's direction and policy now, would be separate and distinct from code enforcement action, which would carry its own potential penalties, not only monetary, which could be, depending on the number of counts and whether or not the court would go along with it, in the thousands, as well as the potential for having to incur your own soft costs to have to redesign and or demolish portions of a structure that may have been built illegally.
Mr. Starbird.
Yes, we don't have it on here because it's not proposed to increase, but a standard design review fee?
Yes, I can tell you right that now.
Which could be one of those common sorts of violations.
The design, well...
Just a standard design review.
It's, I believe it's, I don't have the fee schedule in front of me right now. It's around $800. That would be somewhere around $1,600.
It's not proposed for increase, so it's not on this schedule. But if it's $800 or $900, it would be double that if you had to, as a result of what you've done, apply for and go through design review on what you've done.
Ms. Friedman.
You said something that just... Did I hear you right that you said you wouldn't be against tripling the fee?
Yes, I wouldn't be against tripling the fee.
So you...
For illegal construction or activity, I would not be against tripling the fee.
Okay, so that's an option you're throwing
That's
out.
an option that
And
if
then
you'd like to consider...
My second question, which maybe is more of a question...
Maybe city attorney probably should weigh in there as to how far can you go with these.
And that is going to be somewhat of a sliding scale. While there are triple fees for a number of things, when you get up to that level with these types of fees, we may have to trigger procedural due process to allow someone to have the notice and opportunity to be heard to challenge that. Double fees are somewhat traditional, and I think very well accepted throughout not only California but throughout the nation. When you start getting into lofty figures of 3 times $5,000 or 3 times $3,000, that could begin to trigger due process considerations.
Well, my question, that was similar to the question I was going to ask, which is, can you also do sort of the reverse, where there's some latitude to waive some of those fees in certain situations? And I'm not sure exactly what that would be, but something where...
Amnesty or something.
Some kind of amnesty for somebody who really... And I'm not saying we should give people a free pass if they do something illegal and they don't realize it, but sometimes there may be things that are slightly more gray area. Someone who's bought something maybe where something had happened and they've inherited it, or...
We have a process right now, and some people take advantage of it because I sign those. Pretty much every other week I have one of those requests that I have to review. And that people can actually request to get a portion or all of a particular fee returned to them after they have paid, and with some explanation. And then in those cases, we have a process whereby we actually go and analyze the situation, and if it's justified, we can authorize some or all of it to be granted back to them.
It seems to me what may get you there is, at least this has been described, the fee is applicable where to legalize a use structure that has received a citation. So let's say somebody inherits a home and realizes they've got something that hasn't been legalized, done inappropriately, and they come in the front door and say, hey, I've got a problem, I need to go through a process to try and legalize it. If they haven't been issued a citation, then we wouldn't double their fees. Now, if you're sitting out there and you've done something and you're caught, and we have to get to the point of citing you for it, then when you finally come in, you'd face double fees.
Well, I would certainly be supportive of the triple fee in certain situations. We've had some really egregious cases, and if that would be something that you think would discourage people from doing things that are flat out illegal or things that they know are wrong.
If you'd like, we could incorporate something that double fee and triple fee with justification. And because there are certainly cases where the amount of staff time we put into retracting an illegal construction and just to figure out what procedures to follow, and then the amount of time sometimes staff spends with the community members and community groups to just explain what happened, it would be a good way to be able to recoup some of that cost to the city.
Well, I would assume at this point you have a majority consensus to look at that, because I feel the same way.
All this is going to come back to us again.
Yeah, we should talk a moment about process, because this is to get your feedback, but all the stuff come back in an ordinance, Scott?
Most of it's resolution, actually.
Okay. Well, it would have to come back to you in some form for legislation to approve any of these that are being adjusted. And once we get them all consolidated, frankly, they should all come back to you to make sure you understand all the various fees that are going into our consolidated fee schedule.
And listen to the public who...
It'd be nice to have them all in one place, though.
In terms, Mr. Howard, in terms of the tripling of fees requiring a notice and due process and so forth, in other words, you're talking about a hearing that would be held where, in the planning office?
First, we're going to determine if that's even necessary. If whether it's double or triple or even a larger amount, is based upon the cost of recovery to process, in other words, administrative time necessary to process that, and it's not really just a penalty, there's no need for a hearing, because it's cost recovery.
Punitive.
But if it becomes somewhat punitive and it looks like it's going to be essentially a penalty to try to dissuade individuals from engaging in that conduct, that's when there's a possibility, and I want to have the opportunity to take a look at it. That's where there's a possibility of needing to trigger.
I'm asking that question because I don't want it to result in us incurring more charge, or rather more cost, in having the administrative hearing and more staff time.
We could utilize that. We could either utilize existing staff or utilize an existing commission to handle that.
Right, Planning Commission.
Either Planning Commission or Building and Fire Board of Appeals, depending on the nature.
Consensus on that, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. What else?
Any further input on fees or adjustments? Not?
Yeah, I recommend an adjournment this time.
I need a second.
Let me just ask a question, though. I'm sorry. When you talk about the fees, is this a comprehensive review of all the fees we charge that have been suggested? Because we talked about other fees and in other departments as well. This is just planning and...
No, this is those proposed to be increased at this point. That's what this list is.
Proposed.
Because we had
increased.
We had also,
new and increased.
If I'm not mistaken, Scott, had gone back and requested to look at other fees. And I forget what context they were in, but increasing fees for...
Some were done last year.
Was it vehicle violations or...
Well, I know there was a request. We did some research on whether we could significantly increase fines that were imposed on speeders, for example, and those types of things. We determined were preempted.
So you did look at that, and that is preempted?
Yeah. Okay. We determined we're preempted by state law.
Okay, a motion and a...
Thank you for your time.
Second.
Second.
Second?